Deep in the wild forests of northern Canada, where the mist lingers between the trees and every sound carries a secret, one man stumbled upon something that would change everything he thought he knew about the world. Tom Harris wasn't looking for legends, he wasn't chasing fame, he was a man who understood the language of the wilderness, until the night he heard a cry that didn't belong to any animal on earth. What began as a rescue soon became a revelation, a discovery that blurred the line between myth and truth, between man and something far older, far wiser. This is the story of the night a retired ranger met the impossible and proved that the forest still holds mysteries humanity was never meant to forget. What would you do if you found a strange creature crying for help in the wild? Not a bear, not a wolf, but something that shouldn't exist. People say it's just a legend. A small, injured creature with thick fur, human-like eyes, and fear trembling in every sound it made. Most people would run. Most would pretend they never saw a thing. But one man couldn't walk away. And what he did next didn't just change his life. It proved to the world that Bigfoot was real and far more intelligent than anyone had ever believed. Tom Harris, 58, was a retired park ranger who had spent most of his life in the wilderness. The forest had taught him more than any school ever could. He respected nature deeply. He understood the behavior of every animal that walked, crawled, or flew through the northern Canadian woods, and that knowledge had saved his life more than once. After retiring, Tom chose a quiet life, a small wooden cabin on the edge of a dense forest, miles from the nearest neighbor. He enjoyed the peace. No cars, no city noise, only the whisper of the wind through the trees and the distant calls of wild animals. This was home. People from the nearby town often came to him for advice about the forest. He didn't talk much, but he was calm, practical, and reliable, the kind of man everyone trusted. That trust would soon be put to the test. Strange sounds had been echoing through the forest at night, eerie cries unlike anything Tom had ever heard. Livestock from nearby farms were vanishing. The tracks left behind didn't match any known animal. Hunters were confused, and rumors spread faster than the truth. But Tom ignored the gossip. Locals whispered about something big lurking in the woods, a creature said to appear once and never be seen again. He'd always dismissed those tales as campfire myth stories for tourists. Tom believed in what could be tracked, touched, and proven. And up until now, Bigfoot wasn't one of them. It wasn't until late afternoon that he decided to take a walk around his property. The sky had turned a pale orange, and the forest was unusually quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, just a heavy, unnatural silence. He noticed it right away. Then came the sound-sharp, desperate cries cutting through the still air. Not one voice, but several short, painful wails that made his skin crawl. It didn't sound like a fox. It wasn't the high-pitched squeal of a rabbit caught by a predator. And it definitely wasn't a deer. There was fear in that sound, panic, almost like a child crying for help. He froze, listening. The noise came again, from deep within the forest near an old, abandoned farm that hadn't been touched in over 20 years. There was an old well somewhere behind it, overgrown with weeds and rotting boards. Curiosity and concern pulled him forward. He stepped carefully over broken branches and strange marks in the dirt, uneven, scattered, as if something had struggled there. Then he saw it, a footprint. It looked almost human, but much larger, too large. The cries grew louder as he approached a small clearing. The weeds were flattened, trampled by something running in circles. He spotted a pile of rounded stones, moss-covered and cracked with age, beside a shattered wooden plank that had once covered a hole. Tom took a deep breath and leaned closer. Fresh claw marks ran deep into the stone, the kind made by something desperately trying not to fall. Whatever it was, it had lost that fight. The cries echoed again from the darkness below. Tom crouched, heart steady but alert, and peered into the well. He expected to see a raccoon, maybe a stray dog. But what he saw wasn't like anything he'd ever encountered. Something was huddled against the damp wall of the pit, small, trembling. At first, he couldn't tell what it was. Thick, dark fur clung to its muddy, shivering body. Its arms were too long for any normal animal of that size, wrapped tightly around itself for warmth. Then it looked up. Two large black eyes caught the beam of his flashlight, eyes filled with fear and intelligence. not the eyes of a wild beast acting on instinct. These eyes knew. They understood he was there, and they were begging for help. The creature couldn't have been more than 5 feet tall. It tried to climb the slick stones, slipping each time and letting out soft, desperate whimpers sounds almost like a child crying. Its long, powerful fingers, nearly human, clawed at the rock until they bled. Tom froze. His mind fought to make sense of what he was seeing. A bear cub? No, the face was far too human. An escaped primate? There were no zoos anywhere nearby, and the proportions didn't match any known species. A memory stirred stories told by old indigenous elders back when he was a ranger. Tales of forest guardians, beings who lived quietly among the trees, avoiding human contact. He'd respected those stories, but never believed them. Not until now. The creature squinted at the light, recoiling whenever the beam touched its face. It raised its hand to shield itself and let out faint, frightened cries. Tom could see its ribs beneath the fur. It was weak, cold, and likely injured from the fall. He knelt closer, careful not to startle it. Its breathing grew quick and shallow, pure panic. "It's okay," he whispered softly, unsure if it could understand. But even as he spoke, he knew one thing for certain. Something extraordinary was about to happen. The creature suddenly fell silent. It looked at him waiting, and then made its own decision. And in that moment, Tom understood something simple yet terrifying. This wasn't a myth. This was a baby Bigfoot. And it was staring at him as if he were its only chance to survive. He stepped back from the well just long enough to grab what he needed, a sturdy rope he always carried and an old folding ladder leaning against a nearby tree. His hands moved fast, but his mind stayed sharp and steady. Whatever was down there didn't have much time left. When he returned, the creature had curled itself into a trembling ball. Tom carefully lowered the ladder into the well, angling it against the wall. The instant the rungs touched stone, the creature panicked. It shrieked and pressed itself against the far side, claws scraping at the rock. Tom raised a hand slowly, his voice calm. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said softly. The creature stared, chest heaving. Its fear was wild, primal, yet behind it was something else. Understanding. Tom tapped gently on the ladder, then on his chest. The creature watched every move. Then, trembling, it mimicked him reaching out and tapping the ladder in the same way. That was it. Intelligence. Communication. Tom nodded encouragingly. "That's it, come on, climb." The creature tried to pull itself up the first rung, but it was too weak. Every attempt ended in a slip and a cry of pain. It was cold, exhausted, and badly hurt. There was no other choice. Tom climbed down himself, his boots sliding slightly on the damp stone. When he reached the bottom, the creature lashed out its claws, raking across his forearm. Pain flared, but he didn't yell or pull away. He stayed still, breathing slowly. Then he extended his hand again, a gesture of help, not threat. Minute passed. Gradually, the trembling eased. The creature's wide eyes shifted from terror to fragile trust. Then, finally, a small, shaking hand, cold and bony, touched his. Tom wrapped his arms around the frail body. It was almost weightless, all bones and fur. He climbed the ladder carefully, shielding it each time it slipped. At the rim, he lifted it out first. The young Bigfoot collapsed onto the grass, gasping for breath, limbs limp. Tom pulled himself out and knelt beside it. The little creature lay motionless, except for its faint, shallow breathing. Cold water dripped from its fur, its eyes were closed. Had he arrived minutes later, it wouldn't have survived. The rescue was over. Now, the real test began. He propped the small body upright for a better look. Mud and water clung to its fur, but that wasn't the worst of it. Its body was covered in cuts, some shallow, others deep enough to risk infection. Dark bruises mottled its skin beneath the hair, signs of impact from the stone walls. Then he noticed the swelling dozens of small bumps along its arms, neck, and face. Bee stings, some fresh, others red and inflamed. The poor thing must have blundered straight into a hive, fleeing from something else, blind with fear. And that wasn't all. One patch of fur on its leg had been torn away, exposing a raw wound, a deep, ugly cut from a trap, the kind used by hunters for wolves or coyotes. It hadn't just fallen. It had been caught, snared, injured, desperate enough to escape whatever the cost. Tom clenched his jaw. This wasn't the work of nature. This was human cruelty. He looked down at the tiny, shivering body on the cold ground. It was still breathing, barely its chest quivering with exhaustion. If he left it here for even a few more minutes, the cold would finish what the trap had started. He gently wiped the dirt from its face. Its eyes opened just enough to meet his. Gone was any trace of aggression, only pain, confusion, and a silent plea for mercy. Tom didn't have to think twice. "I can't leave you here," he whispered, surprised to hear his own voice crack. He wrapped the little creature carefully in his jacket, avoiding the open wounds. It whimpered once, then went still, trusting him completely. He stood, holding the baby Bigfoot against his chest. This wasn't just a rescue anymore. Whether he wanted it or not, its life was now in his hands. He carried it through the forest, moving quickly but carefully over the uneven ground. Its breathing was weak but steady. Now and then it let out a soft, pained sound, a reminder that the suffering wasn't over. When Tom reached his cabin, he pushed the door open with his shoulder and laid the creature gently on an old blanket near the stove. He stoked the fire until warmth filled the room. The creature flinched at the heat, but didn't retreat. Its eyes slowly opened, scanning the walls, the furniture, the flicker of the fire. It wasn't just looking, it was studying, trying to understand where it was. Every sound made it tense, but there was no aggression, only fear mixed with cautious curiosity. Tom cleaned its wounds using the same kit he'd once used on injured deer and dogs. Each time he touched a sore spot, the creature clenched the blanket with its long fingers, teeth gritted in pain, but it never tried to bite or claw. It was weak, yet it still chose to trust. As he worked, the reality of his choice began to sink in. He could call wildlife authorities, but they'd cage it, dissect it, or worse. Hunters would see it as a trophy, a payday, or a headline. No matter who found out, the result would be the same. This little being wouldn't survive. Tom leaned back and exhaled slowly. The forest had given him this life to protect whether he wanted it or not. He draped an old blanket around its shoulders and whispered, "You're safe here, I'll figure something out." He didn't know how, but he knew one thing for sure. No one else could ever find it. Hours passed. The fire's warmth brought color back to the creature's face. It began to sit up on its own, its eyes brighter. When Tom offered a cup of water, it mimicked the way he held it, slow, cautious, observing every move before trying for itself. It coughed after the first sip but kept going. It wanted to learn. And Tom noticed something remarkable. When he nodded to it, it nodded back. When he opened his hand, it gently pressed its palm against his. It had no human language, but it understood kindness. It understood trust. Later, he brought out a small jar of honey. The moment he opened it, the creature's nose twitched. A soft, excited hum escaped its throat. Tom let it dip one finger into the honey. It tasted it, then looked up at him with wide, grateful eyes, as if that sweetness was the first comfort it had known in days. A fragile bond had begun to form. But comfort wasn't the only thing growing between them. Night fell, and with it came a new kind of danger. Just past midnight, when the forest should have been still, the cabin walls began to tremble. Heavy footsteps moved among the trees, slow, deliberate, circling. Tom quietly blew out the oil lamp and stepped to the window. He couldn't see anything in the darkness, but he could feel something out there. The baby Bigfoot suddenly sat upright, ears twitching. It let out a sharp, mournful cry and turned toward the door. Fear and hope mingled in its wide eyes. It knew exactly who was out there. Its mother. A deep, resonant call rolled through the forest. Not a roar, not a threat. A search, a warning. A mother demanding her child's return. The little one shrank away from the window, heart pounding. If she found the cabin and thought her child was in danger, one wrong move could mean death for them both. Tom tightened the blanket around the baby and whispered firmly, "You're safe. Stay quiet." He covered the window and pressed his ear to the wall, listening to every step outside. The bond he had built may have saved the baby's life, but now it was putting his own in jeopardy. The morning that followed was anything but peaceful. Just after sunrise, a pickup truck rumbled up the dirt road toward his cabin. Tires crunched against gravel loud enough to wake anyone, friend or foe. 3 local hunters climbed out, rifles slung over their shoulders. Their faces were hard, nothing like the casual expressions he was used to seeing. One of them called out while Tom stood in the doorway. "Something big tore a deer apart not far from here. Tracks everywhere. You seen anything strange?" Tom's pulse quickened, but his voice stayed steady. "No," he said, almost slamming the cabin door behind him. "Just wolves, same as always." They exchanged looks. They didn't believe him for a second. One crouched near the muddy patch beside Tom's woodpile and ran a finger across a clear print, long toes, spread wide, far larger than any human foot, his brow furrowed. "This ain't no wolf," he muttered. Inside, the little Bigfoot stayed perfectly still, as if it understood the danger. It crouched behind the table, eyes wide, watching Tom's every move. The hunter stood and brushed the dirt from his hands. "We'll track it tonight," he said. "Bag something like this, and we'll make a name for ourselves and a fortune." Tom's stomach turned. To them, a creature they didn't understand was just another target. "Be careful," he said quietly, hiding the urgency in his voice. "We don't miss," the man replied with a cruel grin. They climbed back into the truck and drove off, the engine fading into the distance. As soon as they were gone, Tom locked the door and checked every window. The forest was no longer the only danger out there. Now men were hunting and they were getting closer. By dusk, the air itself seemed to change. The familiar sounds of the forest went silent. Even the wind held its breath. Then the ground began to tremble, slow, heavy, deliberate beneath the cabin floor. This wasn't just movement, it was purpose. Something enormous was moving through the trees, no longer hiding. The baby Bigfoot resting by the fire suddenly sprang to its feet. Its fur bristled. Then it cried out a long, desperate wail, filled with recognition. And from the forest came the reply, a thunderous roar that shook the windows and rattled Tom's bones. No bear could make a sound like that. It was a roar that seemed to echo straight into his spine. The creature ran to the window and peered through the small gap in the curtain. Tom followed its gaze and froze. What he saw defied every story, carving, or rumor he'd ever heard. A towering figure, at least 10 feet tall, stepped into the clearing. Broad chest, massive shoulders rippling beneath a coat of thick fur. Her face was fierce and intelligent, a mix of fury and fear. She scanned the clearing with sharp, deliberate movements, inhaling deeply, tilting her head to catch the faintest sound. Her hands were like tools of survival, powerful enough to break trees or protect her young. She wasn't hunting, she was searching. The baby cried louder, struggling to stand, reaching for the door. Instinct overpowered fear. It wanted its mother, no matter the risk. Tom caught it gently but firmly, whispering as it squirmed and whimpered in frustration. Another roar echoed louder, angrier. The mother was calling again, warning again, demanding again. Then Tom's fear shifted into something colder, realization. If the hunters saw her, they'd shoot first and brag later. No hesitation, no mercy. He crouched beside the young creature, his voice low but urgent. "If you go out there now, you'll die. She'll die too." The baby didn't understand the words, but it could feel the fear. Night was closing in fast, and the hunters would soon be on the move. Tom knew what he had to do. Keeping the creature here would only get them all killed. The hunters wouldn't stop until they had something to claim. He wrapped the baby in his coat, slipped out the back door, and vanished into the darkening woods. Every step was cautious, every sound magnified a distant shout, a rifle's safety clicking off. The baby clung to his shirt, trembling but silent. The mother's call came again, closer this time, low and aching, cutting through the trees. Tom pushed forward, heart pounding. Then he saw it, a massive shadow ahead, standing motionless, powerful, watching him. Her chest heaved, protective, and ready to destroy anything that threatened her child. Tom slowly set the baby down. The little one whimpered softly, then turned and reached toward him one last time, its tiny fingers pressing against his chest. There was no fear left in its eyes, only gratitude. It was saying thank you. Then it turned and ran to its mother. The towering figure knelt, inspecting every wound with careful, human-like precision. Her eyes lifted to Tom's, sharp, intelligent, judging. For a fleeting moment, they understood each other. He had saved her child, and she would let him live. With one last breath, one last glance, she disappeared into the forest, the child safe in her arms. Tom watched as the darkness swallowed them whole, knowing his life would never be the same again. He stood frozen motionless under the weight of what had just happened. The giant Sasquatch mother had been reunited with her child. The little one clung to her fur, trembling not from fear, but from the relief of safety. For the first time, it was truly safe. For a brief moment, Tom felt an overwhelming sense of peace flood through his chest. He had done the right thing. He had kept his promise. The forest stood still, too still. From somewhere in the distance, he could still hear the faint shouts of the hunters moving closer. But the mother was no longer afraid. She turned her gaze toward Tom not as prey, not as a threat, but as something different. Her deep, intelligent eyes locked onto his. Then she began to move. Each heavy step landed softly, deliberate, graceful, despite her massive frame. Tom's breath caught in his throat. He didn't dare move. When she stopped before him, her enormous hand slowly opened. Resting in her palm was a smooth black stone, polished and etched with symbols unlike anything he had ever seen, intricate lines spiraling together, forming what looked like an ancient language. She knelt, gently placing the stone into his hand, folding his fingers around it. A gift, a message, an acknowledgement. Tom's heart pounded in his chest. She understood him. Still holding her child close, the mother turned and disappeared into the forest. No sound, no breaking branches, only silence. And then, in the blink of an eye, they were gone. The hunters scoured the woods for hours, confused, angry, finding nothing. No tracks, no fur, no trace of any creature. Tom said little. He only wanted to go home. Back in his cabin, he hid the carved stone deep inside a drawer somewhere. No one would ever find it. On quiet nights, when the world was still and the moon hung high, he sometimes heard the calls echoing through the trees, low, powerful, alive, and unmistakable. And every time he heard them, warmth spread through his chest. They remembered him. The Sasquatch were real, intelligent, aware, and fiercely protective of their own. The forest never spoke of that night again. But somewhere beyond the trees, beyond the reach of men and their guns, a mother and her child walked together under the moonlight, alive, free, and hidden once more. Tom Harris never told anyone what he saw. The hunters went home empty-handed, still chasing stories they would never understand. And on quiet nights, when the wind drifted through the pines, Tom would stand at his cabin door and listen. Sometimes, he swore he could hear them, faint, distant but real, a low call echoing through the valley, thanking him in the only way they knew how. He would smile, hand resting on the black carved stone hidden in his drawer, and whisper back into the dark, "You're welcome," because deep down he knew the truth. The legends were never lies, they were memories.